Ethan was shocked when he saw a helpless puppy that seemed to be stuck. As he approached, he wanted to free the helpless animal. It was at that moment that he discovered something that made his blood run cold. Without hesitation, he pulled out his phone and dialed 911, realizing the situation was far more grave than a simple rescue. Ethan took a couple of steps back from the puppy. His desire to help the poor animal quickly made way for a strong feeling of fear. He looked the puppy deep in his sad eyes and knew he could not leave it alone. But he also realized that there was no way her could help this puppy alone. Ethan knew that his only option was to call 911. The 911 operator could not help but put some question marks on Ethan's call. A problem with a stray animal seemed more like a case for animal rescue services or even just a local shelter. Calling 911 was a big deal, and she wondered if this was reason enough to warrant the call. But when Ethan explained more about the situation the puppy found himself in, the operator realized this was very serious. She quickly sends out multiple units to Ethan's location and asks if he can make sure that other people can also stay away from the puppy in the meantime. Luckily, it is not that busy yet at this early hour, but Ethan does notice that more people are starting to flood the street. He promises the operator he will try his best, and Ethan is put to work nearly immediately. As more people flood the street, the pleas and sad eyes from the puppy are starting to draw a lot of attention from Good Samaritans who want to lend a helping hand. But they are really surprised when Ethan tries to actively stop them. They even suspect that Ethan might be responsible for the situation that the puppy is in. But they quickly change their mind when Ethan points out the reason why they can't go near the puppy, and this prompts them to immediately avoid the animal at all cost. Ethan looked back at the animal, and he could see how confused and sad it was that nobody came close to him to try and help him out of this predicament. All Ethan hoped was that the animal would hold on just a little bit longer. A couple of minutes later, there was quite a crowd around the animal. People were extremely curious as to how this situation was going to play out. But none of them dared to come as close to the animal as Ethan. He started to become really nervous about his task to keep people away. Luckily, he started to hear sirens in the distance. The police had finally responded to the call, and they came in big numbers. When the cars pulled up, it was clear that they did not only take normal officers on this mission, but it also immediately made sense why they took so long. Close behind the first couple of officers, a larger police van pulled up, and Ethan had little doubt that this was the bomb squad. Ethan knew that they were also set to come. It was the whole reason he had decided to call 911. When he came close to the trapped dog, he quickly noticed that tied to the animal's entrapment was a small device that clearly looked to be an explosive, and it had scared the pants off him. He had no idea how powerful the blast could be, and thus he stayed far away from the animal. From that moment, the police took over the proceedings. They set up a parameter and had the bomb squad make their preparation to defuse the potential explosive. Ethan was holding his breath. He was just hoping that they managed to get the poor dog free without setting off the bomb. He had no idea how difficult this was going to be, but at least the professionals were handling this now. The bomb squad was handling this very carefully, but they were also not slow. Maybe it was because the bomb could be on a timer, but to Ethan, it felt like they had managed to remove the explosive and put it in a safe box within minutes. Other officers quickly went in to free the puppy, and only when the dog was out did they give the all-clear sign. The scene was chaotic, but controlled. Police officers, their hands up and voices firm, ensured the crowd kept a safe distance. Yet, they beckoned Ethan forward, through the sea of uniforms and flashing lights. "We need to talk," one officer said, not unkindly. The crowd watched, whispering, as Ethan, looking more puzzled than ever, stepped through the police line to be met with serious, expectant faces. Why was the puppy trapped like that? The question wasn't new to Ethan, but coming from an officer, it felt heavier. He shook his head, genuinely clueless. The officers exchanged glances, their brows furrowed in concern. The seriousness of the situation was dawning on everyone. A puppy with a bomb was no small matter, and the why of it seemed to hang heavily in the air. Amid the whispers and the flashing lights, a new vehicle pulled up. Animal Rescue, with their calm efficiency, stepped out and immediately attended to the puppy. With gentle hands, they secured the frightened animal on a stretcher. "We'll take it from here," one said, offering Ethan a reassuring nod. The puppy was in good hands now, off to get the care it needed. The police station was a buzz of activity, but in a quiet room, Ethan found himself sitting across from two officers. "We just want to understand," one began, their tone friendly but inquisitive. Ethan recounted his morning, from the discovery of the puppy to the moment the bomb squad arrived. The officers listened intently, jotting down notes, their expressions unreadable. Outside, another officer cordoned off the area. "No one in or out," he announced. The investigation was far from over. Clues were being gathered, and every detail mattered. The officer surveyed the scene, his eyes sharp, knowing that whatever had led to today's events was hidden somewhere in the details. The area was quiet now, a stark contrast to the morning's earlier chaos. As they drove to the station, one of the officers glanced at Ethan in the rearview mirror. "You're not in trouble, you know," he said, his voice firm but kind. "It's clear you were just trying to help out." Ethan, who had been staring out the window, turned, a mix of relief and worry on his face. The city blurred by as they moved closer to uncovering the truth. At the station, Ethan unfolded his story once more, his words quick but clear. "I just found the puppy this morning, stuck and scared," he explained. He emphasized how he knew nothing beyond that alarming discovery. The officers nodded, taking in every detail, their pens scratching against paper. Ethan felt a bit helpless, wishing he had more information to give. An officer leaned forward, his expression grave. "This isn't the first time we've seen something like this," he revealed, causing Ethan to sit up straighter. The room felt suddenly colder. "There have been other puppies, in similar dangerous situations." Ethan's heart sank. The thought that this wasn't an isolated incident, but a pattern, was horrifying. Who could do such a thing repeatedly? The bomb squad's swift action wasn't just luck, another officer chimed in, breaking the heavy silence. "They've dealt with this twice before." Ethan's eyes widened in shock. The same scenario, played out multiple times? The expertise of the bomb squad had likely saved more lives than he realized. It was a chilling thought that someone was methodically targeting stray puppies this way. The most disturbing part, as the officers explained, was the lack of urgency in finding the perpetrator. "It's been tough," one officer admitted, looking frustrated. Despite the danger, it hasn't been treated as a top priority. Ethan felt a stir of anger. Innocent animals were being used in some twisted game, and it seemed like the urgency to stop it wasn't where it needed to be. Ethan's mind was racing as he left the police station. He felt a deep sympathy for the puppies caught in this madness and a strong determination to help find the perpetrator. Although the police had to follow their protocols, Ethan wasn't bound by the same rules. He was resolved to do whatever he could, thinking, "If the police can't dive in deeper, maybe I can." Back home, Ethan was a whirlwind of action. He understood the police's limitations, but knew he wasn't going to sit back. "There has to be someone out there who knows something," he thought, pacing his living room. Ethan was ready to tap into any resource available, to gather clues and piece together this puzzle. His determination was clear. He would start his own search for information. Ethan's laptop became his command center. He scoured the internet for any mention of similar cases, hoping to find leads or others who had encountered the same situation. Forums, social media platforms, local news archives. He combed through them all, his eyes scanning hundreds of posts and comments for anything that could point him in the right direction. Then he hit something. A single, almost ignored Reddit post caught his eye. The post detailed an eerie sighting of a dog, seemingly trapped with explosives. It was buried under countless other threads with barely any replies. Ethan's heart raced. This could be the break he needed. The post was vague, but it was the most solid lead he had found so far. Without hesitation, Ethan typed out a message to the poster explaining his urgent need to know more and his connection to a recent incident. He tried to convey his sincerity and desperation for information. This was a long shot, but it was the best lead he had. Ethan hit send, barely daring to hope for a response. Then he waited, staring at the screen, willing a reply to appear. Ethan's phone buzzed with a reply faster than he expected. The poster, Michael, had seen his message and understood the urgency. They quickly exchanged details. Ethan explained the situation, his encounter with the puppy, and the police's involvement. Michael was all ears, typing back with speed. The connection was made, two strangers brought together by a shared concern over a disturbing trend. Michael was just another local guy until he stumbled upon a similar horrifying scene. He'd found a puppy, much like Ethan, but had the luck of a police officer being nearby to help defuse the situation. Michael had hoped it was a one-off horror, something he could forget. His message conveyed a mix of relief and dread that someone else had experienced the same terror. For Michael, the incident was a nightmare he'd hoped was isolated. His recount to Ethan was filled with a sense of disbelief that such cruelty was repeating. Hearing Ethan's encounter reignited a deep concern in Michael. The thought that what he witnessed wasn't an isolated incident, but a recurring evil, struck a chord. The fire to act, to do something about it, was rekindled. Ethan's story stirred something in Michael. The thought of sitting back was no longer an option. He expressed a fierce desire to team up with Ethan, to pool their resources and information to track down the perpetrator. It was clear to both men that action was needed, that waiting on the sidelines was no longer an option. They were ready to take a stand, together. Both Ethan and Michael felt a profound frustration with the police response, fearing that the seriousness of the threats to animals was being underestimated. They knew that they couldn't just stand by. Action was needed, and they were ready to take matters into their own hands. The conversation between them was a mix of planning and determination, a mutual understanding that they would do whatever it took to stop this cycle of violence. Ethan and Michael met where the morning's drama had unfolded. The area looked normal now, with no hint of the earlier chaos. Ethan pointed to where he'd found the puppy, trying to paint the picture for Michael. The normalcy of the scene was in stark contrast to the day's earlier events. They both felt a mix of relief and unease, standing where the incident had occurred. With the police and their barricades gone, Ethan walked Michael through the morning's discovery. He described finding the puppy, the fear that gripped him upon seeing the explosives, and the quick arrival of the police. Michael listened intently, nodding. He could picture it all too well, having gone through a similar ordeal. The quiet street held echoes of the morning's urgency. As Ethan shared his story, Michael noted a crucial difference in their experiences. "The puppy I found, it didn't seem like a stray," he said. Unlike the dog Ethan had found, Michael's puppy was clean, well-fed, and looked cared for. This discrepancy struck them both. Could this difference point them toward the perpetrator? Michael's observation about the puppy's appearance puzzled them. If the puppy wasn't a stray, how did it end up in such peril? The notion that it was in too good shape to be living on the streets sparked a new line of thought. This discrepancy could be a significant clue. They considered the possibility that the animal's condition might lead them closer to the person responsible. Reflecting on the puppy's condition, Ethan voiced a chilling possibility. What if the first victim was the perpetrator's own pet? He speculated. This thought cast a dark shadow over their investigation. If the perpetrator started with his own dog before moving on to strays, it suggested a deeper level of malice and planning. It was a grim theory, but it felt like a piece of the puzzle they couldn't ignore. Ethan and Michael huddled over a street map spread across Ethan's kitchen table. They were determined to track down the dog and, through it, its owner. The problem was, they had no idea where the dog had been taken after the rescue. Maybe the shelter, Ethan suggested, recalling his own experience from that morning. It was a starting point, and with no other leads, it was their best bet. While Michael had no leads on the dog he found, Ethan remembered that the puppy he saved was taken to a local shelter. If the police handled both cases similarly, it's likely they brought your dog to the same place, Ethan reasoned. The plan was set. They would visit the shelter, hopeful that the staff could shed some light on the situation. Arriving at the shelter, Ethan's heart lifted when he spotted the puppy he had saved earlier, now safe and sound behind a glass partition. Its tail wagged as it spotted him, a bittersweet moment in the midst of their grim task. It was a small comfort to see the animal well and cared for after the morning's ordeal. Michael approached a shelter employee, describing the dog he found and the approximate time it should have been brought in. The employee's face lit up with recognition. "Yes, I think I know the dog you're talking about," she said, leading them through the back to the kennels. The hope of finding another piece of the puzzle spurred them on. The employee stopped in front of a kennel where a sad-looking dog lay curled up. At the sight of Michael, however, its demeanour changed. It perked up, its tail thumping against the floor. Michael knelt down, and the dog licked his hand through the bars. It was undoubtedly the dog he had saved. The recognition between them was clear, a moment of joy amidst their serious quest. As Michael rekindled his bond with the rescued dog, Ethan engaged the shelter employee in earnest conversation. Learning the dog was chipped, Ethan's pulse quickened with anticipation. This chip could be the key to unravelling the mystery. The employee checked her records, her fingers dancing over the keyboard. Moments later, she looked up with a mix of surprise and pity. "The chip led us to an owner," she began. The owner, an elderly man, had been contacted by the shelter after they traced the chip. His response was disheartening. He admitted to abandoning the dog months ago, declaring he had no interest in reclaiming the animal. Ethan's heart sank. What they hoped would be a significant lead seemed to dead end at a careless act of abandonment. The case seemed to slip back into the realm of stray dogs. Ethan shared the old man's response with Michael, expecting to move on, but Michael wasn't convinced. "No," he insisted, "something doesn't add up." His determination rekindled Ethan's resolve. Michael argued that the dog's well-kept appearance contradicted the man's claim of abandonment. His plea to the employee was fervent, needing to know more about this previous owner. Eventually, she relented, scribbling down a name and address. With a name, Kyle, and an address in hand, Ethan and Michael's mission gained new momentum. Michael's insistence on speaking directly to the old owner had paid off. Ethan was unsure of Michael's plan, but followed his lead. They thanked the shelter employee, who looked on with a mixture of concern and hope, and left. The pieces of the puzzle were slowly coming together, pointing them toward a new destination. Eager to confront Kyle, Ethan and Michael wasted no time heading to the address provided. Ethan, though filled with questions about Michael's intentions and the connection Kyle might have to the larger mystery, knew better than to press for answers during the drive. They had a name, a location, and a growing resolve. What awaited them at Kyle's doorstep was unknown, but they were determined to find out. The journey to the old owner's place took Ethan and Michael far from the bustle of town, into quieter, more desolate roads. The car's interior was filled with a heavy silence, punctuated only by the occasional gravel crunch under tyres. Both men were wrapped in their own thoughts, the anticipation of confronting Kyle creating a palpable tension that neither wished to break. Arriving at the address, they were met with a house that spoke of better days long past. Peeling paint, a yard overrun with weeds, and a single aging car in the driveway suggested neglect. The sight of the car, however, indicated Kyle was likely home. Ethan and Michael exchanged a look, their resolve firming. It was time to seek the answers they had come so far for. Their knock on the door echoed with a sense of foreboding. Time stretched as they waited, the delay heightening their anxiety. Finally, the door creaked open to reveal Kyle, his expression one of guarded annoyance. His demeanor soured further upon hearing their purpose. Ethan noticed the immediate tension, the air thick with confrontation as Michael began to explain their mission. As Kyle moved to close the door, Michael's hand shot out, stopping it. Ethan's stomach twisted with unease at the tactic, doubting the aggressiveness of Michael's approach. Their quest for answers was important, but the potential for conflict loomed large. Ethan's eyes flicked between Michael and Kyle, unsure if this confrontation would lead them any closer to the truth they sought. Ethan's apprehension grew, fearing Michael's actions were driven by a desire for vengeance against Kyle for abandoning his dog. However, as the standoff at the doorway continued, it became apparent that Michael's motives were not rooted in revenge. His determination was fueled by a need for understanding, a desire to uncover the truth behind the mysterious circumstances surrounding the dogs. Michael's insistence intensified as Kyle repeated his claim of merely kicking out the dog. "Why, though?" Michael demanded, not satisfied with the shallow explanations. The lack of a clear reason piqued Ethan's interest too. The old man's hesitance and vague answers hinted at a deeper story yet to be uncovered. It was clear to them both that Kyle was withholding something significant. Kyle faltered under their scrutiny, his reasons sounding more like excuses. Ethan watched closely, his skepticism growing. The old man's inability to provide a straightforward answer was telling. The air was thick with tension, each hesitant reply from Kyle adding to the mounting suspicion. It seemed increasingly likely that Kyle was not being entirely truthful about his connection to the dog. Seeing Kyle's resistance, Michael escalated his approach, hinting at involving the police. The mention of legal involvement, given Kyle's link to the chipped dog, seemed to shake the old man. "The police will want to know about this," Michael stated firmly, his tone leaving little room for further evasion. Kyle's eyes darted between them, the threat of police action weighing heavily on him. Kyle's resolve finally crumbled. "All right, I'll tell you," he sighed, a mixture of defeat and relief in his voice. The barrier he had put up began to fall away as he prepared to share the true story of the dog. Ethan and Michael leaned in, knowing they were about to hear the crucial piece of the puzzle that had brought them to Kyle's doorstep. Kyle revealed a surprising twist. The dog was never really his. He had purchased it for his son, who, due to a troubled past, was prohibited from owning animals. "It's all in my name, but it was for him," Kyle explained, his voice softening. The story took a new direction, shining light on the complex family dynamics at play and suggesting a deeper layer to their investigation. Kyle recounted his son's troubled past and the restrictions that barred him from pet ownership. Despite these obstacles, his son yearned for a dog's companionship. Kyle, torn between law and paternal love, eventually acquiesced, hoping a pet would steer his son towards a brighter path. This act of fatherly love, however, became entangled in unforeseen consequences, leaving Kyle in a state of regret and worry. Until this moment, Kyle had been in the dark about the fate of the dog, assuming it had simply run off. The news that it had ended up in a shelter was a shock, but also a relief. It meant the dog was safe, at least for now. This revelation, however, did nothing to ease his growing concern about his son's involvement in more sinister activities. Faced with the gravity of the situation, Kyle disclosed his son's name, Tim, and his address. It was a difficult moment for Kyle, torn between family loyalty and moral duty. He had hoped his son was uninvolved, but the evidence and his own suspicions pointed otherwise. Reluctantly, he conceded that if his son was responsible, he needed to face the consequences. Justice, he believed, was paramount. With Tim's information in hand, Ethan didn't hesitate to contact the police once more. He detailed their findings, emphasizing the urgency of the situation. The police, recognizing the severity of the allegations and the potential danger involved, sprang into action. There was no delay in their response, a testament to the seriousness with which they treated the tip-off about Tim. Tim resided within the city limits, making the police's task of locating him straightforward. His arrest came swiftly, almost before Ethan and Michael had time to process the rapid turn of events. The evidence against Tim was compelling, leaving little room for doubt about his involvement in the distressing series of incidents. It was a significant breakthrough, one that promised to bring some measure of justice for the animals involved. Inside Tim's house, the police discovered a chilling array of tools and materials for making small explosives. The backyard revealed an even more heartbreaking scene. At least 5 stray dogs were found locked up, their eyes filled with fear and confusion. This grim discovery confirmed the depth of Tim's involvement in the crimes and hinted at his dangerous intentions. At the station, under the weight of evidence against him, Tim quickly unravelled, his facade crumbling. The police pressed him for answers, eager to understand the motives behind his alarming actions. Surprisingly, it didn't take much for Tim to admit his deeds. His confession was laced with a mix of defiance and remorse, a complicated web of emotions that hinted at deeper issues. Tim confessed to an intense love for dogs, marred by a deep-seated resentment towards a society that denied him the companionship of pets due to his criminal record. This resentment had festered over time, warping his affection into something dark and destructive. He saw his actions not just as revenge against his personal injustices, but as a warped statement to the world. His logic was twisted, driven by the misguided belief that his drastic actions would highlight the perceived unfairness of his situation. Trapping dogs with explosives was his way of making a point, of showing the extremity of his exclusion from a simple joy allowed to others. This dangerous path was his protest against a rule that kept him from owning dogs, a misguided attempt at drawing attention to his plight. Now, Tim faces trial, with the evidence against him painting a grim picture of his future. It's likely he will spend a significant portion of his life behind bars, a consequence of his actions and the danger he posed to innocent lives. In a heartening turn of events, the dogs he endangered found new homes filled with love and care. Michael, Ethan, and even Kyle stepped up, offering these animals the safe, loving environments they deserved, turning a dark tale into one of hope and redemption.